Hey up everyone. Well, I touched on this subject earlier in the year, and it's been a year that proves yet again that I was right to be concerned. And if you're thinking of buying a new motorcycle, I urge you to listen on. This isn't a nice or pleasant subject, but it is important. And before any new major purchase, you should always inform yourself. Some of you will know already I have not been shy about calling out various manufacturers and the faults they have thrown onto the market. This is a growing problem and it needs to be addressed. What I said in the previous video about motorcycle recalls, which I will link at the end, is that things were getting worse. More and more stupid faults were happening. Some were recalled and fixed, but that doesn't alter the fact that they were released onto the market prematurely. These faults should have been picked up in the development stage, not after release. In 2024, during the whole year, there were 27 recalls, and I thought that was too many. Especially when you add on the not recalls that were never recognised by the manufacturers. By September last year, there had been just 16 recalls announced. So far this year, during the same period, there have been 32 product recalls already. That is twice the number of recalls that we had during 2024. That is just plain ridiculous, and a sad reflection on the development departments of each and every one of the companies involved. And let's not forget, this doesn't include the KTM LC8C camshaft issue, the KTM 790 and 890 airbox seal issues, the Triumph triple gear change issues, and the electronic problems, Suzuki's D800C issues, and various other problems you will find plastered all over the various rider forums. For me, this is less about the individual faults that are recalled than it is about an industry-wide problem of designing every last nut and bolt down to its lowest possible spec to cut production costs, and or a don't care attitude of directors who have little connection to the world of motorcycles and no care for the riders beyond the depth of their pockets. Before I go on, I have to say a quick thank you for all the support, and especially to the BAREBONESMC family on the Ko-fi page. You can find more videos there and on the Rumble channel as well as the backup channel on here. But for now, grab a cuppa because this is another epic. Honda have been the biggest fail of the year so far, with the most recalls. Yes, they recognised the faults and owned them, but 7 recalls and more when we are only 3/4 of the way through the year. Really? First in March, they forgot to put threadlock on the gearshift lever pinch bolt on the CB650R and CB650. Seriously though, why was that not picked up in testing? Vibration can cause many issues and is always present. No, I wouldn't have thought it would have been such a problem on a big 4-pot, but did they not do many miles of riding before it was released onto the market? Or was it as simple as one production run that the torque settings were wrong and they weren't checked? Then in May, the wires behind the headlights of the CBF 125, 250 and 300 were recognised as a failure point. This one looked very much like a manufacturing fault, because the failure was actually where the wires entered the terminal block. Then there was a defective seal bolt on some of the 750cc, 1000cc and 1100cc platforms, which meant recalls on the CB1000 Hornet S and the SPS, the CB750AS Hornet, the Rebel CMX 1100, the CRF 1100 AS, A3S and A4S Africa Twins, the NT 1100 AS, and also the XL 750S Transalp. So not just one recall really, there are 6 different recalls in that one go. The seal concerned unfortunately allowed oil to dribble into the path of the rear tyre, so not a minor issue. As it occurred on only certain chassis numbers, this one looks like either some components were out of spec or a new supply was trialled and failed. But again, it's basic stuff. We've been making seal bolts for long enough now to know how to do it. So why did this slip through? There was a recall on the NC750X too, but that was a tyre issue, so in some ways less about Honda's fault, but nevertheless it did happen. Then we found out the same guy who did the terminals on the CBF 125 and 250 had done the wiring inside the headlight on the CBF 125, so they started failing too. Next it was the SH 125 and 150 scooters, where the crankshaft position sensor became disconnected, which means a total strip down. And last it was yet another wiring fault with the horn and headlights on the CRF 1100 Africa Twin. Maybe they decided to buy the looms off Leone AG, and Stefan Piera told Leone to design in some faults to damage Honda's reputation. And if you don't get that joke, you should watch the last video in the KTM saga I did. Now that would be a conspiracy theory in the making. In reality, that is 10 recalls, even if we don't count the defective tyres. Is that really acceptable? Next on the list, 3 manufacturers all had 3-ish recalls. Triumph had the worst start to the year with the TF250 switch cube failure that gave us the first self-starting motorcycle ever, and with the second recall again being tyre related, you could say that doesn't count. However, if that doesn't count, the latest one should count double, because on the Daytona 660 they have now discovered, or at least admitted to, an engine defect that can result in catastrophic engine failure because of an inadequate oil flow. Now I have recently heard that it is simply that they got the length of the dipstick wrong, but I can't confirm that yet. If that is the problem, I'm not sure whether to laugh or cry at Triumph for that one. What isn't included is the problems with both the quick shifter and the gearbox output shaft on the 900 and 1200 triples, and the ever-growing problem of premature cam wear, which has also affected several models. There are more too, and I will be looking at these problems in more detail soon. For now, Triumph are still trying to wriggle out of taking any responsibility and have point blank refused to deal with the problems, but they do have form on that approach. They also dumped a 900 Rally Pro owner in southern Spain, unable to find anyone to fix the 2 spokes that had broken, despite all their promises about Triumph's ultimate care package. Next come BMW. They scored a straight 3 recalls with no tyres involved, and if the Daytona engine recall wasn't so bad, I would have put them in second place. At BMW, the problems started in March, with an oil filter that gradually unwound itself, dumping all the oil on the BMW S1000RR, HP4, HP4 Race, M1000RR, M1000R, M1000XR, S1000R and the S1000XR. How? For how long have we been making and using the same sort of screw-on oil filters? What the hell did they do to make such a basic design go wrong? Then, in April, it was discovered that the right-hand handlebar switch on the BMW R1300GS, R1300GS Adventure, R12 and R12 9T wasn't waterproof, and that humidity could lead to the engine dying with ignition failure or delayed lighting functions. I guess they never thought anyone would be going out in the rain. Then, in May, on the all-singing, all-dancing, top-of-the-range BMW M1000R and M1000XR, a production fault could cause the jet needle inside the steering damper to move out of the screw connection. This caused maximum damper settings to be applied, so the steering got instantly very heavy. A production fault? Or a lack of testing? Who knows on that one. But this was on their range-topping motorcycle with a retail price of over £22,000 before any extras are added. Absolutely ridiculous and inexcusable in my opinion. Next is a brand you might not expect here, again equal to Triumph and BMW on 3 recalls so far, and that is Kawasaki. And despite a good start to the year, recently there have been 3 recalls. The first was on the EX500 or Ninja 500 depending on your market. A manufacturing error means the clutch release lever may not be properly welded to the shaft, which can break and make it impossible to disengage the clutch. Then they forgot to clean the powder coat off the chassis where the earth strap is connected on the Kawasaki Maguro S1, which sadly we don't seem to get here. It's a retro style deer called 250. After many owners and dealers had looked long and hard, the problem was finally located and a fix scheduled. But this is another one that is very basic stuff that should have been tested and sorted out before release. It's hardly rocket science. Next was the Kawasaki ZX6R or the ZX636. The crankcase bolts were over tightened, pinching the crank bearings, leading to a noisy crank and eventually crank seizure. Not what I expect from the company, who have always prided themselves on building the strongest engines of any of the big 4. These are basic production errors, which I can only put down to production staff being pushed to higher production targets, or I would guess that automated machines weren't calibrated properly before the production run. Initially, there were 3 tyre recalls too, but then if we add the Triumph and Honda tyre issues, that makes it 5 tyre recalls across multiple companies. As well as the Honda and Triumph issues, Avon, Dunlop, Pirelli and Metzler all had delamination issues. Pirelli and Dunlop blamed contamination, whereas Pirelli and Metzler just blamed irregular tyre wear. Whatever the cause, have they all forgotten how to make tyre carcasses that don't delaminate? Yamaha had 2 recalls. The big one was the CP2 engined range, so involved the Tracer 700, Tenere 700, MT07 and XSR 700, and another bike I will come to later. In Yamaha's words, a corrosion inhibitor can react with worn friction plate material when hot to create a viscous substance that can lead to the clutch failing. Clutch can fail to disengage or drag, which could lead to the vehicle unexpectedly moving if a gear is engaged, even with the clutch pulled in. Between the lines I read, we tried a new cheaper corrosion inhibitor and didn't do enough testing to realise it was crap. Then the Tenere 700, which has always been a pretty reliable bike, had another issue come up. This one was as simple as the front mudguard kept shaking loose because the screws were either too weak or just not thread locked. I've had dealers say both, so to be honest I'm not sure which is the truth of the matter, but it is another basic problem that shows a retrograde step for the Tenere 700. Next we have 2 from the KTM stable, the same fault just on multiple bikes. This is all about brake calipers that were simply made from bad castings that should have been spotted in pre-production checks. I talked about this in the last recalls video, linked at the end and in the description. It was an issue on most of the Husky and GasGas dirt bikes from 2022 right up to 2024 with GasGas and 2025 with Husqvarna. Why Husqvarna carried on using them for an extra year is another one that baffles me. The full list is in the video, but basically most of the Husqvarna FC, FE, FX, HQV, TC, TE and TX models, and the GasGas EC, ES, EW, EX, GG and MC models. That leads us into another issue that shows the aftermarket can be just as bad as the OEM manufacturers when it comes to mistakes. First Tanaki and then XMHT and Jiangxing Yue all made brake pads that were contaminated with asbestos. These did all look like very cheap brake pads sold through AliExpress, but they popped up everywhere because the dealers were buying them to resell. So the lesson here is don't buy cheap nasty brake pads. So that one is fairly simple and your own responsibility. Then we come to the manufacturers had just one recall so far. Suzuki had some problems with the AN400 Bergman, a scooter with a previously untarnished reputation. The M3, M4 and M5 all had a kink in the fuel line which made it rub against the vapour absorber housing, which in turn wore through the hose, causing leaks with obvious fire implications. That seems a daft one when the Bergman has been around so long, but I guess even Suzuki employs some monkeys. Then we have one from Indian, where a rear suspension pushrod assembly was under-engineered, causing it to deform under load on the Challenger, Chieftain, Pursuit, Roadmaster and Springfield models. This one had a knock-on effect too. As well as initially affecting handling, it jammed the main wiring loom against the coolant reservoir and rear tyre, and in a worst case scenario, the back of the bike just collapses completely. Now these aren't the sort of lightweight bikes where you are trying to cut every last ounce of weight. So why did Indian use a substandard component on the rear suspension of a bike that is already heavy and likely to have a passenger and luggage strapped to it fairly often? The luggage strapped to it, I mean, not the passenger, hopefully. This is an example of how companies just aren't putting in the hours on testing. If they had, this one would have been found. Replacing one small component would have solved it, so it's less likely to be about overall cost as much as genuine oversight. But it should have been picked up when they were test running the models. The only reason for this one, as far as I'm concerned, is simply a lack of testing done. Then comes Can-Am. On the Origin and Pulse, they simply didn't make the battery box watertight, which I would have thought was quite important on a high power electric motor system. A lithium battery fire between your legs doesn't sound like a great selling point to me, but I guess they never realised motorcycles get used in the wet. Then we come to Fantic, who had a licence to use the CP2 engine from Yamaha, and they fitted it into a 700cc version of their Caballero. This is the same clutch fault that the Yamaha suffered from. The anti-rust coating they used simply glued the clutch plates together if it got too hot. Unfortunately for Fantic, they got that series of the CP2 engine too. Then it's Ducati. This one baffles me again, in all honesty, and there are no excuses in my opinion. A rear brake hose between the ABS control unit and rear caliper can be damaged by heat, they say. Tell me, how many years have we been making brake pipes and anti-lock brake systems? Yes, that's a rhetorical question. The real question is how on earth did Ducati manage to fit a substandard brake hose in a high temperature system on their top of the range bike? I wouldn't expect a problem like this on any bike, but certainly not a Panigale V4 that costs north of £25,000. They say it can lead to a sudden loss of braking power in the rear wheel brake. No shit, Sherlock. And if you don't know that saying, it doesn't take a detective to work it out. How did they miss that one? With all the testing at World Superbike levels of speed, I can't believe at least one of the test riders didn't get the brakes hotter than any of us would on the roads. Last one today, we finally get a recall from a Chinese bike company. CF Moto found a welded seam on the gear change shaft was cracking. Well, at first I thought, okay, I can see how that might not be picked up. But then I thought, why is there a welded seam on a gear lever shaft? And I looked. In all the parts books and manuals I have in the garage, and on the various 650 Kawasaki twins I looked at, which I believe these bikes were based on, nowhere could I see any welded seams or a reason to weld seams on the gear change shaft. Why would you weld a seam on a gear shift shaft that creates rotational stress every time it's used? It will always create a weak point, however good the welder is, surely. So that one made little sense to me in the end. And so, even without looking at the faults and flaws that weren't recognised and recalled, you can see that this year has possibly been the worst year for factory recalls I have ever known. Why? And how is this supposed to rejuvenate the industry? How will it attract new riders? And why should I go out and buy a new motorcycle when so many of them, even the so-called reliable ones like the T7 and Transalp, suffer from what I think in general are stupid problems and mistakes that should never have happened? In this age of robot-driven automated precision production lines, why are there so many mistakes? Could it be that fully trained, skilled human techs might actually do a better job than robots? Because that is one of the things that all these bikes have in common. They are built in high output automated factories with a minimum of human operators. Yes, humans make mistakes, but those mistakes tend to be one or two mistakes in a whole batch of bikes. Set up the automated line wrong and you get a complete batch of bikes all with the same stupid production error. Then they have to work out how to deal with it without just scrapping the whole batch. Utter madness. Do you think there are more recalls now than there used to be? Why do you think that is? And have you suffered at the hands of a manufacturer that doesn't want to recognise a known issue with a bike? I'd love to hear about your experiences of warranty cover, both good and bad. Thanks as always for watching. I look forward to hearing your comments and will reply when I can. Try and remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you're watching on mobile, hitting the hype button helps too. And sharing the video anywhere you think people will be interested helps us more than anything these days. Do remember to look in your subscription tab, because to be honest, in my honest opinion, the YouTube algorithm is broken. The channels you subscribe to are much less likely to appear on your homepage now. You have got to go to the subscriptions tab to search us out. If you would like to help us to stay truly independent, on the Ko-fi link in the description you get access to a private group where I share videos I can't screen on YouTube. There are videos anyone can watch there, but you can make a one-off donation or join our group of monthly subscribers for access to other videos that only the channel's patrons can see. Join us on Rumble too. There is some great content that I just can't share on YouTube. And don't forget, we make the best biker t-shirts. Hundreds of original designs on premium quality t-shirts and neck gaiters, all available worldwide. Links to the main website and the Redbubble shop are in the description. Have a great week, and always remember, keep your spanners close and your keys even closer. Ride free, everyone!